Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. My name is George. I'm the CTO and one of the co-founders at Noxus. I have the pleasure of moderating this panel with the greatest set of people. I'm going to intro them very quickly one by one. So Anna with us, she's a CTO with a lot of experience in the Fintech space, particularly in compliance, and also she's starting a new business now. Sam Ane with us, the Director of API Engineering at Barclays. Matt, the CTO of YetiPay, and Frederick, the Deputy CIO of Starling Bank. Thank you so much to all of them for joining us, and for all of you as well. So obviously in this panel, we're going to cover a lot of very interesting topics in the reality of the regulatory space in Fintech, and also how it affects tech leadership in companies, smaller and larger companies. We're going to talk about interesting things, innovation, compliance, and actually the impact in technical teams. But I guess first, a more interesting question just to get us to know each other, and a very quick, like 15-second answer for each one of you. If you were an AI company, which AI company would you be? I'll start with you, Fred.
Sure. Well, we had to fight with Matt, so I'll go for Mistral. Obviously, French AI company, quite famous at this stage with loads of really cool models, and of course, calling the chat model Le Chat, has to win for the most fun name out there.
We'd have Mistral.
Yeah, I stole Fred's preference by saying Hugging Face. First of all, because they have the best logo, but also because they're focused not on ever larger language models, but spending time looking at smaller ones that are more optimized, more specialized, actually caring about energy consumption and things like that. Awesome. So I really like that ethos.
Sam?
Very interesting choices, because I went with Interconnect AI, because I would like to think my superpower is to connect everything and make sure everyone talks with each other. So I resonate with them quite a lot, because they really connect anything to everything at the moment. So that's why I chose them. Anna?
Awesome.
Nice one. So I'd go with, not per se AI company, I would go with NVIDIA. I've actually been there since the AI boom reached our lives, but I think they're so fundamental to anything that is done in AI. So I'd be NVIDIA. Okay,
awesome. Thank you so much. So I guess that gives you a little bit of context about each one of us.
George, what's yours?
Oh, mine.
Yeah.
I hadn't prepared that one. Can I say Noxus? No. I would probably choose Noxus, I guess. Okay. But all right. So on to the first point, and obviously you all know the topics of the elephant in the room. Anna, if I can continue with you, I guess. Compliance obviously impacts organizations today. That's a given, particularly in the fintech space. Mm-hmm. In your experience, do you think regulatory compliance actually kills innovation, or do you think it forces teams to build better, more robust solutions? If you could give us an example, would be awesome.
Yeah, well, George, you started with the most difficult question.
Of course.
There are so many, I think, so many aspects to it, to compliance in innovation, in development. I suppose it all depends on the context. So if the company is operating in an environment where they're catering for companies that have to comply with the regulation, then I suppose you have no choice. If you're not complying, you won't get a business, so you have to do it. But I also saw I worked for businesses where they had a bet of going in some area, in some market where they thought, well, actually, they knew that in order to go into this market, they have to be compliant with certain regulations. So they would go and do all the compliance, all the hard work. But actually, there was a signal that is missing over there from commercial signals. So there are also examples of going somewhere too early. So you have to kind of figure out what's the right moment, and what's the right amount of regulation and compliance for each stage of the business. There is also, I suppose, some risk-taking, right? As leaders, we probably would need to figure out if we don't comply straight away, there is some risk involved, but can we take this risk? And also, I think from the innovation perspective, what we also need to remember is that if my business has to comply because of the regulatory environment that we operate, it means that all of our competitors have to do as well, right? So there is an opportunity to do it better, to do it faster, maybe to do it from the beginning. So maybe also
take an advantage.
Taking an advantage, yeah, also. And I suppose as a technology leaders, we have an opportunity to kind of maybe to pose it to our teams, to say, instead of just saying to them and say, oh, well, you have to do it. Why? because we said so, because the regulation has so. We can have this conversation with our teams to just say, like, what does it actually mean for us, for our business? And I was sharing a small anecdote from a personal life and regulation, which would hit me really hard. So I have a little daughter, 6-year-old, and she used to go to a nursery 3 years ago. And then there is a chain in London that got hacked, and the data of the children and carers and their addresses and everything was hacked to the darknet. And they wanted a ransom, right? And because my daughter left this nursery 3 years ago, if they were compliant with the GDPR, you would think, like, why the data was there? It had to be deleted. There was this principle of minimization. So that wasn't followed. So I suppose we can, to your point, George, we can innovate and ask ourselves questions. What is the very, very important part of this particular regulation that we have to comply, but actually is heart of our business? Mm-hmm. What do we actually have to do? And to make it, to allow people actually to connect to the substance of the business through this regulation. That would be my take.
Yeah.
Right?
No, it makes a lot of sense. If I may ask, let me throw it to you as well, Matt. So in your experience in YetiPay, do you think, just to recover the question, is regulatory a problem in order to innovate, drive better products?
So I think for us, so YetiPay, we're a small payments company. We're actually an agent for platforms. We're built on agent for platforms. So fortunately, we get to outsource a lot of our kind of regulatory requirements to them. We have PCI compliant stuff, but most of it is outsourced to them, which is nice. But we recognize that going from scrappy startup to mature org is, that's a difficult journey to go on at the best of times. And actually, if you put some of the regulatory things that we know we have to do act as actually quite helpful guardrails, and have kind of kept us, have been a nice forcing function for us to get our ducks in a row and do things properly from the get-go. For a specific example, one of the things that we did very early doors when we knew that we were going to have this requirement, but before it was actually upon us, was we used the Scale Factory. So Mike, who just spoke in the previous session, they have a SaaS Foundations product, or service, which is basically it's a well set up AWS configuration in a box. So it's a whole bunch of Terraform and then some consultancy that they give you to help you set it up, and that's been a really helpful foundation for us because from the get-go we've had separated workspaces, workload accounts. We've had audited. All our logs go to an audit account which has separate access control, nicely locked down. And so when it has come to trying to achieve certain compliances, you can point, as we've started to do now, point Vanta at it, and they'll just run the automated checks, and it's all set up already. And that has definitely not impeded our ability to innovate because we're just used to operating within these constraints, and it's a nice setup from the get-go.
You're almost applying compliance by design, which I'll ask you in a second then. But let me connect to that you just said. You brought the SaaS. Well, fundamentally, there's a lot of new things that financial companies are using. We're talking about open banking APIs and obviously AI in the AI space, applying AI models, AI-powered lending. There's a lot of new things coming into the market. Where do companies and fintech should draw the line between what is acceptable risk-taking and what is being too careful about compliance? Maybe Frederick, if I can.
Yeah, sure. So I guess thinking about your question, you start with the acceptable risk-taking. I'm a big proponent of experimenting things and learning from those experiments. And so I would say as tech leaders, I know it's a bit boring, but start with the risk appetite of your organization, review it, try and understand at which level it's been set. And if you feel that you're not able to innovate fast enough because the risk appetite is not set at the right level, then do start lobbying whoever sets it, whether it's your CRO, the board, and so on. And try to get that alignment. And there are good arguments behind this. You could say that you risk losing market share to competitors if, for instance, the risk appetite is too strict. And then once you have this, I think the culture. I think George at the break, you talked about how when you talk to CEOs of companies where the CEO is quite, say, innovation focused or AI focused, the conversations with regards to Noxus are a lot easier. And so I think that culture from the top and those leaders you included, messaging all the time about the importance of innovating to avoid being disrupted and to keep growing has to be heard. And then the third thing I would mention is something we're quite fan of at Starling is using small frequent increments. So of course we do that for technology at a very detailed level, very small pull requests that are released in production multiple times per day. But you can also do it from just a feature suite point of view. So if you take our AI journey, for instance, at Starling, and I'll talk specifically about LLMs here, we immediately recognized the value, but we started with internal use cases quite narrow, so summarizing calls and chat from our customers. And then as we got familiar and we exposed the rest of the organization to it, including compliance team, including risk teams, then we moved to slightly more complicated use cases. So extracting structured information like, is the customer raising a complaint? Are they doing a right to information under GDPR and so on? And essentially, progressively, you bring your organization with you on that journey. And so, next step is, of course, customer-facing AI. We launched a few features recently, spending intelligence and scam intelligence. And then the next step will be agentic AI.
That's a very interesting experience. Simon, how about you?
Yeah, no, to build on top of that, I think I completely agree with you. We are in an industry that we have to make sure compliance goes hand by hand with our innovation. So building our guide rail as fast as we move in our innovation is very important. Obviously, for me personally, I always believe I can take risk at my product, but not on my customer trust, because we all know open banking, embedded banking, going through real-time API, all needs and requires quite significant experimentation, which means innovation and usage of AI is becoming must-have. But as soon as innovation touches customer data, going back to what Anna mentioned, when it's involving credit score or GDRE is becoming no risk acceptance, we have to be very careful around it. So what we believe at Barclays is this is a speed control. So we have to move fast in how we design, how we're testing our APIs, because I work with API platform, obviously, and how we trying to experiment in our PRs. But as soon as it's coming to the release, we have to take extra cautious over there, do extra check, making sure our sandbox is going ahead of any releases. Like what you said, taking a small releases to see what's the live transaction is responding to the new changes that we have done. And obviously, as I said earlier, the guardrail is going to be making sure monitoring is in place as early as possible. Before even raising my CRs to RTB, run the bank team, I need to make sure all the dashboards are updated with the new changes. So for me, it's becoming a middle ground, making sure we are very bold and aggressive with experimentation, because AI is going very fast, but extremely careful at the same time and conservative with our releases. So.
Yeah, thank you so much. Frederick, let me just come back to you for 30 seconds from one of the question of the audience. So you're as a CIO in a highly regulated industry, do you think there's a point, what would you do, and is there a point where risk appetite is too big? Because you were talking about compliance and what other departments could do.
I'll take a whole on this one. Do you want me to answer it now? Or?
Yeah, if you could just
what
30
do you
seconds.
do if you think the risk appetite is too high? So I'm going to assume someone is, when you say too high, it's too strict, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think I would personally go to, so within the Starling set of policies and frameworks, the CRO is the person, so the chief risk officer is the person responsible for setting the risk appetite. And so I would go and talk to him. He happens to be French, so that helps. And obviously, not everybody has that luck. But yeah, no, I would go for that person, the committee who is responsible for this. And if it's a committee, try and find allies. There will be people among your board, especially even in a regulated industry, I would say, who will see the value of different innovation, whether it's AI, DLTs, quantum, etc. And yeah, just build those relationships, have those allies, and keep at it, right? It's I hate the term, it's evangelizing, right? You keep talking.
It's an organizational challenge more so than a
Exactly.
almost technical or individual one.
Yeah.
Is the answer to that the same if the risk appetite is too low?
Ooh,
That's a very interesting one, yeah.
that's perhaps a harder question.
Yeah, I guess it's not your. I guess if you've got a chief risk officer, it's their job to make sure it's not too low.
Yeah, but I guess we should all feel responsible. I truly believe tech leaders are also business leaders, and so if you think the risk the company is taking is going to bring you onto the front page of the Daily Mail or whatever newspaper of choice, you probably should go again as a business leader and talk to the CRO or the committee who is responsible for setting the appetite, I think. And also you have a choice as an individual as to whether you want to stay within the organization.
Right, of course.
Completely agree with you, because you as a technology leader are shaping the whole industry at the moment. So if we don't influence all these decisions and don't get involved and making sure your voice is heard is actually quite risky, because understanding of the risk is on us to make sure the compliance team is understanding the behavior, so they understand what risk we are taking. So yeah, I completely agree with you.
Thank you so much. We answered the question twice for different perspectives. So whatever was the right angle, I hope both were answered.
Yeah.
So let me switch a bit the pace here. You are all engineering leaders or related to the CTOs and directors. Let's focus a bit more on the development impact that compliance regulation has on the teams. So I guess I can go back to you, Anna. Do you think it is the role of every engineer to think about compliance, or do you think it's a responsibility that should go from top to bottom, fall down more on the technical leaders, or is it even something that should be handled by specialized teams, for example?
I think it needs to be the responsibility of probably leadership of the organization, because especially in fintech and highly regulated environments, health tech, I used to work in some health tech companies as well. In highly regulated environments, the stakes are high. You're expected to operate at a certain level, certain standards, and the mistakes there or not being compliant can be highly costly. And I think, and often these regulations, they're not only related to the practices of engineering teams, but how the whole organization operates. So I think it's a mistake just to say that actually this is only the job of the technology team to make sure that they're compliant. It's actually the responsibility of all the organization, because some regulations will be you will need to comply to make sure that you have the HR processes, that you have the processes around documentation overall. So there needs to be controls around the whole range of the organization. Of course, it all depends on the industry and what kind of regulations you need to comply with. But I think in highly regulated environments, and this is fintech edition of CTO craft, it's a mistake just to put it on specialized team. And if it's specialized team, just the regulatory team, or it's a technology team, I think it needs to be set up as a priority, whichever way your organization sets priorities. It's via principles or the OKRs. If you're at the stage of the business that it needs to scale, start complying, it needs to be the job of everyone, because I saw examples when there would be even one person, they are in charge of making sure that the organization complies this year, and it's miserable for everyone because it's never easy. It's often you would find, probably a lot of you've witnessed this stage when a company goes from a startup to scale up. You have to rewire a lot. You have to do lots of plumbing. From Frederick knows what I'm talking about. So it can't be work of one person,
of course.
one team. It needs to be set up as a priority from the top. That's my opinion.
Now I'm curious about your opinion.
Okay, so I guess with regards to engineering teams and tech teams being responsible for compliance, I agree with you. I don't think they have to be the team responsible for it, but I do also think that engineers like to solve problems and to solve under constraints. I think articulating compliance challenges to tech teams, I do think is very important, and you will get better outcome if you do so. And so instead of giving them like back 15 years ago, giving them a requirements document with this is what you need to do and please don't think about it, just implement it. Instead, you give them the parameters of the problem, including the regulatory and compliance challenges. I think that's quite powerful. And we have some examples of this at Starling. For instance, when the contactless limit moved to £100 in the UK, actually the tech teams come up with the idea of, well, okay, we have to abide with the £100, but it's quite a lot of money, £100 for most people. Probably not for people in this room, but for most people outside of this building, it's a lot of money, right? So we gave them a little slider in the app where they can go all the way to 100 if they want to, but they can actually limit themselves and say, actually, I don't want to have a contactless limit, which is more than, say, 50. And this came from tech teams. I think it's just a very nice mix, combination, amalgamation, I guess, of both that creativity of technologists and the compliance angle. Now, with that said, to answer the original question about how we do it at Starling, I guess at this point in time, there's an element of having a central compliance team who's able to check everything we want them to check. But this view that the frontline teams have to take responsibility for it as well. And we're also moving towards something we call hub and spoke. So each area will have, not within the compliance team, but next to them, a mini other compliance team. So there's, within our technology risk and management function, there's a compliance team, which is, they're more part of technology than they are part of compliance. And that's why we call it the hub and spoke model.
What's the interaction between the end of the spoke, I suppose, and the tech team? At what point are the compliance folks getting involved?
They talk a lot. Essentially, because again, we see it as a tech team rather than a compliance team.
So they're like a specialist skill set that's sort of embedded in the team.
Yeah. It's very niche.
I think it's helping a lot with buildability of that as well, because quite a lot of time we're finding that, I don't know if it is more fintech or everywhere, compliance and regulatory requirement a lot of time needs to be reviewed by tech team to make sure they are realistic as well, especially with the upgrades and necessary compliance in compatibility of libraries. I always finding those tech session is helping us to make sure we set the ORAC requirement, something that is actually buildable with the timeline of the ORAC. So I don't know if you agree with that, but that's the part that I get most value from engaging the tech team way early on that.
Well, I guess it's this idea that if you expose all of the constraints, then you will get to a solution, right? Whereas with the right solution. Whereas if you hide some of the constraints and you at the end you pull the curtain, it's like, ta-da! There's also this one over there. Then it's not going to work, right?
Exactly.
So,
it's triggered that solution mindset of them as well, which is quite.
So the shift left on everything, right? We keep shifting left.
On everything.
Let me highlight actually one of the points you made. Engineers like to solve problems. You point them as something, and compliance, you can formulate it as a problem, essentially. It kind of connects a bit with what you were talking about before, Matt. So let me throw that to you. Compliance by design, as you're saying, you used the service to start with something that is compliant. Could you talk us a bit more about, have you successfully implemented this, and do you think it affects deployment velocity?
We're fairly early on in our sort of compliance journey, I suppose. But we have implemented a bunch of things that would be classified as compliance by design, and actually I think they go. There's a lot of just best practices that you wouldn't really, or I didn't necessarily think about them as compliance by design, but they are. It's things like code gets reviewed before it gets deployed. You have least privilege principle applied to your roles. All that kind of stuff is compliance by design. It's so basic that you've got it, but it is compliance by design. I guess I would kind of maybe flippantly say, what does it look like if you don't have compliance by design? What is that? Uncompliant, or is it compliant by committee after the fact, where you throw something over the wall and then hope that the compliance team signs it off, or they have problems and they send it back. I mean, you'll talk about shift left. That model is like the old model where development would finish their work and then send it to the operations team to deploy it and run it. And now we have DevOps and we have DevSecOps and everything's shifting left, and it's compliant by design of the process.
So, in a summary of that, do you think if you'd have a lot of engineering effort and brain power into the compliance part, does it affect or not affect the deployment speed?
I mean, there are definitely things that have to happen in the SDLC that if you didn't have all these checks, you wouldn't have to do. But I mean, so technically, I suppose merging that pull request that Dependabot raises because it's found a critical vulnerability, you could argue that that's slowing down your process. But then, if you don't slow down and merge that pull request, you've shipped a vulnerability. So is that slower? I don't think so.
Yeah. Maybe not in the long term.
No, yeah.
I guess it's what you compare it with, right?
Yeah,
If you compare it with
What's
not
the
being
time?
compliant at all, good point.
What's the time frame we're looking at? I guess that makes a lot of difference.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we talked about the elephant in the room, but the other one is obviously AI, right? We've talked about compliance. AI and compliance brings a lot of challenges. But my question is the other way around. I guess, Sam, do you think, can you use AI to automate things like compliance checks, catching violations? Or no, is that AI just creating risks around things like model explainability, data lineage, algorithm bias? What is the total impact of AI in this space, in the development? Is it positive, negative? How do you feel about it?
Yeah, certainly. I think we are living in a world that AI is becoming must-have in everything. AI power, everything is becoming. Even in this panel or this, I don't think I have been in any talk today that there is not.
This panel is not AI powered.
Yeah. No,
human
sorry,
powered for a while.
Human. Well, that's the whole thing. The human element and review is the critical part. I think in finance in general, we're living in two reality at once because there is a huge desire push for innovation using AI in everything we have, but at the same time we have this zero appetite for regulatory surprises, which is a game changer. So I think we all agree that AI overall level up our compliance massively. We acting in a different stage at this point. We can scan through our logs in a matter of seconds, detecting a pattern of suspicious pattern, a fraud pattern is becoming fairly quickly compared with weeks of review of data in the past. But at the same time, AI is opening up risks that never have been defined in the past, and no traditional regulatory rules can neatly monitor that. So from my point of view, in a simple example, that majority of our LLM can make a decision about a loan application. But if we cannot justify how we made that decision and walk through the data that how we got to that conclusion, it's not compliance. We cannot use that in a real life. So from my point of view, AI is helping us with self-level compliance issues, is making us go faster. So the execution side of that is extremely faster. So we could have think that this is positive impact of that. But at the same time is created the deep level challenges that make the whole accountability, transparency that is required in our heavily regulated industry quite harder. So for me, it's a mixed feeling. It's definitely made our life easier in one sense, but I have to explain a model that works like a black box, which is not easy. I don't know if you have a different view on that, but...
Yeah, Matt, do you?
Sure. Well, I mean, so we don't have any deployed generative AI stuff. So we don't have that non-deterministic problem. I think on the question of whether AI helps or hinders our compliance journey. I mean, the places where I see it used are, there's a lot of compliance which is about writing documents, which is not very fun. And it's pretty neat that you can get an LLM to say, these are all the things that I'm obliged to do. Please write me a policy document that summarizes neatly all of these things so that I can put it in front of our staff so that they easily know what they have to do. It's a bit trivial, but that is a thing where AI, generative AI in particular, has really helped. But if there's if you're looking at two sides of the coin, you've got that on one side, and on the other side, you've got a whole bunch of extra problems caused by not by using AI internally, but just the fact that it exists in the world. I'm concerned about the use of shadow IT or shadow AI tools and sort of data exfiltration because people aren't careful about what they're putting in different places. And you can mitigate that to some extent by kind of in a policy document saying you're only allowed to use such and such a tool.
Training, perhaps?
Sorry?
Training, perhaps?
Training people? Or
Training people.
Oh, yeah, training. Yeah. Yes, but then you're reliant on people actually,
following through.
Yeah, you've got the human element there. I mean, that's one of the hardest parts of our compliance journey, I think, has been, yes, you've got this nice policy document, but then how do you actually make sure that the human doesn't write their password on a sticky note and leave it on their laptop, or has a clean desk at the end of the day, and various other things that the policy says that you should follow.
Don't have the password under the keyboard.
Is this what you do?
It is the social hack, the good old social hacking. So let me switch a bit the topic again, back to the regulation side. I'm actually going to pick up a question from the audience again, maybe for you, Anna, just because I'm very curious about this one. So in your experience, which you have plenty of, what regulations do you think are the hardest to provide evidence, of compliance with? Is it a challenge? Anything that jumps to mind? And I'm sorry to put you on the spot.
Yes, you are putting me on the spot. Hardest to put evidence. There is one piece of regulation that really drives me mad, is the cookies. I don't know. There is probably, my instinct is that probably there was a very good intent in this. And the majority of the regulation, as you said, when you really look into it, it makes lots of sense. And GDPR and cookies, I just sometimes as a user, you would go on the website and I put a lot of effort of opting out, and sometimes they make it so difficult. So is there any evidence? What was the thought process behind it? Is it working? So I haven't seen any evidence that this piece of regulation that was put is working, and who is it working for? So that would be my...
Yeah, I think when they make being compliant such a mechanical thing, it kind of loses the impact that it should have. I don't know if any one of you wants to add something to this.
The interesting thing on this in my mind is that if the regulations are outcome or principle based, you're always at the mercy of how it's going to be interpreted by your central compliance teams or the regulator themselves, right? Yeah. But then if you ask for guidance from the regulators, then they also say you must follow the guidance, and then we fall back into the prescription, and none of us here. Typically, if you ask which one you prefer the outcome-based or principle-based to the prescription-based. And so there's this weird paradox or tension in my mind whereby if it's re-prescriptive, in a way, yes, it might be tedious to do, but maybe it's easier to meet. Right. Whereas if it's outcome-based, it appeals to the fact that we're all clever beings, and so we want to appreciate we all have common sense, and so we are going to do the right thing, and so an outcome is more appealing, I think, to a human than just being told you have to tick that box over here. And so I think there's this weird tension, right? It's more appealing to our intellect, but then it's much harder to know whether you are in the right or not in the or.
I also feel that sometimes some of the regulation goes into the space of proving the negative. Like, so for example, in GDPR, there's a lot of things which are easier to demonstrate, but the one thing, like, you should not keep data for more than 2 years or something. It's very hard to prove that there is no data anywhere that references a specific customer after 2 years. It's basically cat and mouse, because usually it's much easier to prove that you did keep the data and you are in the wrong, right? So I guess for me, if I was to answer, I would say like when the compliance part is about proving the negative, it becomes really hard because they're just waiting for you to slip up essentially.
In that case, though, there is at least you get a positive effect from the deterrence. So
100%.
you don't necessarily have to be able to prove it. It's the fact that it says you should encourages most people to do it properly. Not, unfortunately, your nursery.
Yeah. There is another thing that just jumped into my mind is a source of wealth. In lots of instances, when we make or when companies conduct big transactions, you have to prove that the source of wealth is not illicit. And how deep do you dig? Like people can say, okay, this is if it's from the salary, it's probably this is where it ends. But if it's from the assets, how the assets were bought, where they're coming from, and then it's almost like infinite. How far would you go? So I think in lots of instances, unfortunately, I saw that source of wealth. It's more of a box ticking exercise rather than going to the source of understanding where the source of wealth is coming. And then, unfortunately, again, companies would say, well, we've done some bare minimum of digging and understanding where the assets from, but have they? How do you prove it?
Yeah, thank you. Well, I guess there's one question on my mind regarding regulation and technology, which is essentially AI is moving so fast, and there's so many new things coming out that. Do you think? I do believe that regulation is most likely lagging the technological aspect. So do you think it is a problem, and can companies be proactive around this? Maybe Sam, if you have a couple thoughts about this.
Yeah, well, that's a quite interesting one because exactly as you said, we're going to be. I feel at this point we are always a few steps behind. So it's quite important go side by side at the same time that we are putting a lot of effort in our innovation, have a dedicated team that work in our guide rail and making sure we do have those specific internal regulation for our work. So, for example, in my own team, as an example of the practices, obviously we all using GitLab Dio for one of their first code reviews, but obviously human reviews on top of that, making sure clear versioning is defined is helping us massively on that aspect. So making sure we investing at the same rate is helping to make sure safety and innovation wins at the same time. But very limited, to be honest, at this point, as we're trying to discover the impact of AI can be predicted what's going to be our roadmap for the next 3 months, because based on the outcome of today, we have to be rapidly adjusting that. So trying to be more dynamic on our approaches at the moment, which make us, to be honest, at this point, having very interesting and unique journey. And I don't know if it's only for us, but I kind of find that this is the first time in heavily regulated area of the bank. Actually, we're having more fun, and I'm having more engineers excited about what they do every day, because usually it was very hard for us to keep them just going through 18 months of ORAC. Is not fun anymore. So I don't know if you guys had a different experience on this.
On the engineering specifically, I don't know. I find the engineers are skeptics when it comes to AI. That's my own. A lot of them are like, oh, yeah. I think there's a lot of why do I need a coding agent to write my code? I can write it faster. And, there's an element of that, and but I feel there's also an age thing, right? I think people who are really experienced but time poor, they absolutely love it because they know exactly what to ask, because they have all of that mental model of how to write good systems and how to organize the code, and so they can just literally say, this is what I want, please go and do it, and I'll come back in half an hour after my next meeting, and it will be ready. People who are junior, well, they need that person who handhold them to learn, say, the syntax of a language and the structure of your code base. But the people in the middle, I guess, right now is very, very hard. I think they're squeezed. They feel squeezed maybe by AI taking their jobs potentially. Sorry, I know I went a bit off topic on this one.
But it is a very hard to predict future. I actually wanted to. We have 30 seconds, so really quickly. go into one of the questions, which I find a very interesting one. The FCA, as the question poses, is themselves, they're looking at how AI helps them as a regulator, which makes a very interesting question. Are you concerned about actually being regulated by bots or receiving a regulatory report on your email saying something and then turns out they forgot to remove the prompt or something like that? Like, is it something that jumps to mind?
No, not to me.
No one is scared about being related by bots.
Yeah, but it will be interesting to see the FCA bot talking to the PRA bot, talking to the Bank of England bot, and so on and so on.
Explaining what we do for that agent to understand that, it would be very interesting, because my product owners always say that whenever AI manage to understand these engineers' languages, they will replace me. So now I'm thinking the same. That's going to be interesting to see, but yeah, very good question for sure.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Anna, Samane, Matt, Frederick, thank you so much. And thank you everyone as well for being part of the audience.
Thank you all.